So I want you all to take a second and put yourself 15 years, 10 years into the future and imagine that you are a parent. If you are already a parent in the audience, I want you guys to have a reflective moment and think back to more difficult days of your child's upbringing. We're going to say that you have a toddler. His name is Jimmy. He's being very rambunctious. It's 10:30 on a weeknight. He's running around in his underwear, screaming at his siblings, throwing things at you, refuses to brush his teeth or go to bed. You want him to go to bed because you want him to be a good kid and get some sleep and be okay at school tomorrow, and you also have an early meeting and you really weren't wanting to be up too late. How can you kind of help your kid get to sleep without getting angry and frustrated and yelling at them? So there are many strategies that parents may be able to think of easily that they could use to parent their child. They may say that if you're a really bad kid and you have a temper tantrum before you go to sleep, perhaps you don't get your special snack after school the next day. Or perhaps they really like reading Goodnight Moon and you say tonight's a Goodnight Moon not night because you're not going to be getting your book. If your kid was a little bit older, perhaps you say maybe they have to do a couple extra chores that week to make up for the fact they had a temper tantrum. So parenting, for the most part, is a lot of matter of conditioning, instrumental conditioning to be exact, which is the pairing and the contingency formation between a behavior and a consequence. So the ways that this can be done is through 4 different methods. The first being reward training, which is the presentation of a positive thing to increase the frequency of behavior. So if little Jimmy was a good boy and went to bed with no fuss, maybe he gets a special cookie before he goes to sleep or the next day. Omission training, on the other hand, is removing a positive thing to decrease the frequency of behavior. So that would be like taking away Goodnight Moon, and maybe that would make them go to sleep. Punishment is the presentation of a negative stimulus to decrease behavior. So perhaps they have to have a timeout for 10 minutes and miss out on playtime. And then escape training is the removal of a negative stimuli to increase the frequency of behavior. So perhaps they have no chores for that week. So you may be thinking why I'm explaining the simple concepts of instrumental conditioning to you, because they seem very intuitive to us as psychology students. And many parents, even if they don't understand psychology, would be able to understand the difference between behavior and consequence. However, let's change the story for a second and say that Jimmy has autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder makes it very difficult for children to navigate this social world. As a small infant, Jimmy may have trouble making eye contact with his caregivers and may not be as affectionate and bonding towards his parents. As he went on into primary school, he may have had difficulty playing with the other children and maybe sometimes preferred to play alone or engage with the other kids. As he moved on, he may have found it very difficult to read social cues and body language, and in that case had a kind of a barrier put up between making meaningful relationships with his peers. And as he went on, he may have had frustrations and temper kind of outbursts and behavioral outbursts when he had a schedule change last minute or something ambiguous, a situation came up that he couldn't understand. So instrumental conditioning can be used in the same way that it can be used for a typical child. It can actually be used for a child with autism spectrum disorder to help them navigate this daily life. So children often go through speech therapy when they have autism spectrum disorder, so a lot of instrumental conditioning can actually be implemented into that to increase the frequency of different behaviors, to work on speech recognition and speech pathology problems. In addition, punishment and reward training are often used to help with a lot of different therapies, including ABA therapy, to help with eating problems, sleeping problems, and kind of reducing the amount of behavioral outbursts that a child may have. Additionally, children may actually receive lunch or treats as kind of rewards to help develop verbal skills in children who have little to no forms of verbal communication. So let's go back to Jimmy. As a parent of a child with autism spectrum disorder, it's very easy to get frustrated or flustered when the methods that you use on a typical child do not work on a child with autism spectrum disorder. But in the same way that reward, punishment, omission, and escape training can be used for a typical child, they can be used for a child with autism as well to increase the frequency or decrease the frequency of certain behaviors. So the thing that we learn about instrumental conditioning in early psychology classes, we kind of take it for granted as kind of this concept that we kind of brush over and then move on to, but it actually has real-world applications. It's fundamental to the understanding of psychology, but it can actually be applied in a meaningful way to improve the lives of children with autism spectrum disorder and give their parents real-world ways to actually help their children navigate this world and help them with daily tasks. Thank you.